And I want to get into that. Let's talk about some of the evidence, because I think that I would really, and I know that the viewers would too, I would really like to hear some of your thoughts about how the diagnoses would interplay with some of the evidence that we saw in the trial. And let's start with probably the most well-known piece of evidence from the trial, which is the turd in the bed. I don't think there's anyone in America, at least, maybe around the world, who has not heard about this evidence. So tell me a little bit about, does that fit with the diagnosis? Is it completely separate?
Yeah, the turd in the bed, unavoidable. Yes, I think that in my mind that would more closely fit with a histrionic personality disorder than borderline. So again, anything to be the center of attention. People with borderline personality disorder, they can be quite explosive and they can do impulsive and extreme things. So yeah, I think you could probably crowbar that into borderline, but it's more indicative of histrionics to me.
And one of the pieces of evidence that struck me particularly was when Camille Vasquez read down a list of text messages. Apparently, Johnny and Amber had a fight. Johnny left, and Amber sent him a series, I'm talking pages of unanswered text messages saying, where are you? Come home, come home, come home, come home. And then, start at the end, like, if you don't answer this, you're turning into a monster. She started talking about using the word monster. It just went on and on and on. And Camille just sort of read through this, and by the time she had read all that, it just seemed bizarre. Can you tell me a little bit about whether that fits into one of the diagnoses?
Absolutely. So one of the core features of borderline personality disorder is this fear of abandonment. So what we often see is people who are in unhealthy situations, whether it's a relationship, whether it's like a household with their family, whether it's friends that are no good for them, that get them into trouble, get them using drugs, etc. And they really struggle to leave because this fear of abandonment. So sending multiple texts, even staying in the relationship, I would say, with Johnny Depp when they clearly aren't getting on, indicates that. So I think that is quite clearly a good match with borderline. Yeah.
What about some of the uses of the terms? And both of them use some pretty harsh terms to describe each other. Does like the use of the word monster to describe Johnny, is any of that related?
No, I would say that it isn't relatedly. It just because, again, from all my assessments, lots of people use derogatory terms, swear words, insults, and they don't have personality disorders and they don't have mental illnesses. It's just what people do in the heat of a moment. So I wouldn't necessarily say that is associated with any specific personality disorder.
All right. What about the missing pictures and missing medical records? And by that, I mean, there were a lot of claims from Amber Heard about times when she had been abused by Johnny Depp. And she would say, I had bruises. And she wouldn't have photographs of them. And in fact, often Camille Vasquez would introduce a photograph of Amber pretty near that time showing no bruise. Particularly, I remember the one where she was wearing a backless evening gown. And she said she'd been hit on the back, and that evening or the next day, she's wearing this backless evening gown and there's no visible evidence of the injuries. Same was true with medical records. There were statements from Amber that, she had some horrific injuries, but she had not ever been treated for that. Does that fit with any of the diagnoses?
Well, if we're, I think what we're sort of both pussyfooting around is saying, is she lying or not? So on the assumption that she is lying, that those things are not true, then I don't think I would say that in itself is indicative of a personality disorder, because some people are deceitful, some people aren't. So another way of saying that is that there will be many people who will lie about this kind of thing to get their partner in trouble who don't have a personality disorder. They're just dishonest. They have a warped moral compass. They have a lack of empathy. They don't care about society's norms, right and wrong, but they wouldn't have a personality disorder. So I think that is dishonesty. At a stretch, you could say that somebody who's histrionic, again, wants to get attention, but I don't think most people with histrionic personality disorder would lie. So I guess what I'm trying to say is I'm not saying it doesn't fit with those personality disorders. What I'm saying is that trait, lying, is more likely to be somebody who's naturally deceitful as opposed to somebody that's got one of these diagnoses.
So then, for example, the TMZ evidence, one of the claims at the trial was that Amber Heard had faked a bruise. That would maybe be separate, and you would say that would be lying and really not connected to either of the personality disorders. But then another part was that when she went to get the TRO, she against Johnny Depp, that she called TMZ, she or someone from her staff called TMZ, had them there ready to take a photograph of and even told them which side to take the photograph of. She denied, of course, having made that phone call, but there was some pretty, I thought, compelling body language in questioning of her that was played at the trial and that came directly from her divorce deposition. Is that the sort of divide you're talking about? One's false, one's attention seeking?
Yeah. So if she did make that call, and again we're speculating here, but if she did make that call, then I would think it's fair to say that is quite histrionic. So that is something that is an easy way of getting attention. So that would fit in with histrionic personality disorder. Yeah.
All right. What about the fact that there were increasing allegations about abuse? And I mean, initially there was one set of allegations, and over time, either because she was willing to reveal more or because she made up more, and that was, of course, a central issue in the trial. Would increasing allegations over time be something that would be related to the personality disorder?
Again, I think at a stretch you could say that it fits in a little bit with borderline because they have these explosive arguments, they lose their temper, they're quite impulsive. So yeah, you could say that. But if she is lying and if she's making these things up, or if she was, then that is dishonesty. So I guess what I'm saying is it could be an element of the personality disorder, but far more relevant to that is her dishonesty. That if she's lying, it's the dishonesty that explains that behavior more than the personality disorder does.
To me, one of the things that sort of switched my thinking about the trial, because when I started watching, I was neutral. I didn't really know anything about the dispute between them. So I began watching the trial. One of the things that sort of switched me was the issue around the charity donations, where she had said, I gave this money to charity. And then later it turned out she had pledged, and there was a long debate between Camille Vasquez and Amber Heard about pledge, donated. They went back and forth until finally it was clear that Amber had said she donated all this and had told the press that and had not yet done so. And she had reasons she said she hadn't done so. But what about that? Would that fit in with histrionic?
I think my answer would be similar to the previous ones in that, yes, it does fit in with histrionic, but because she's being deceitful. So somebody with histrionic who doesn't lie wouldn't do that. Whereas somebody who with histrionic personality disorder who has no problem lying, who doesn't, who has this lack of empathy or just doesn't care, would have a lower threshold to lie.
Okay. So in that particular case, there really wasn't any reason to lie about it. And so that's why you're saying it doesn't really fit with histrionic. It's not like she had to say that to get attention. She made it up.
I think it just made her look.
Then she just made it up for no reason.
Yeah, I think it just made her look better, didn't it? It made her look more generous than she actually was. So I suppose that would be the motivation. So it's that's pure deceit more than any kind of issues with the personality.
Right. So what about throughout the marriage, there were photographs that she took of Johnny Depp in sort of embarrassing, compromising positions. There was one, for example, with ice cream melted on his lap, where she was showing that, he was passed out or drunk was what she was arguing. He said he was asleep. Does any of that interplay with the way relationships work with borderline or with histrionic personality disorder?
Yeah, good question. I don't think I would necessarily match that with histrionic because it's not really people that are, with that histrionic PD always want to be the center of attention themselves. And this is more about so they would be more interested in making themselves look good rather than making their partner look bad. So I don't think it fits with that. Borderline, yeah, I think you could argue that they do tend to have these turbulent relationships. As I was saying before, they tend to idealize people at some times, then denigrate them at other times. So it's typical for them to be passionately in love and getting on really well with their partner one day, and then they have a mini argument, and then he hates their guts the next day, and then they reconcile, and they're kind of on and off, but more than the average person, more than is typical or normal. It's like really extreme depths of passions. So it's very feasible that somebody who is annoyed irritated with their partner, again, say in the context of an argument, or they feel they've been belittled, to go to extreme lengths more than the average person with borderline. So I think you could say there's a match there. Yeah.
What would you typically see in a relationship? I mean, if someone is let's divide them up. First, let's talk about borderline personality disorder. What are going to be some of the consequences in a relationship?
So I I can definitely speak to this because I've assessed many patients who have this issue, and they have very chaotic lifestyles and very chaotic relationships. So say if it's a romantic relationship, they will very frequently break up with their partner, maybe go and do something impulsive, which is very much in the nature of people with borderline, maybe go and sleep around with other people, then regret their actions, then get back with their partner. Maybe they get on well for a couple of days, then they might have an explosive argument, there might be some physical violence, and so it's just like a tumultuous cycle of absolute turbulence that is very typical of people that have borderline. I want to make this clearly that I'm talking about the extreme ends. So I think it would be very unfair of me and unkind to say that everybody with this diagnosis acts like this. That's not the case. It's the ones that I see that have such extreme personality disorders that they end up being arrested or end up being in prison for something like domestic violence. So I'm talking about the extreme versions.
What about with histrionic personality disorder? How would that affect a relationship?
I think people who are truly histrionic struggle to settle down into long-term relationships unless and until they find somebody that feeds their kind of narcissism. So if they are, they're people who put a lot of time and effort into their appearance and their looks, so they probably are relatively attractive, so they probably can get a partner fairly easily. But over time, whether that's weeks or months, because they're always the center of attention, because they don't really show that much empathy or even that much interest in their partner's daily life, they'll lose a lot of partners. But if they find somebody, and it could be I'm not talking about every single case, but there could be like a looks mismatch. So say, for example, you've got a man that's got histrionic personality disorder and is, very good looking, really into himself. He might have a string of girlfriends but never really connect with them because he's so egotistical. And then he might find a girlfriend who's not quite as attractive as him, but she wants to stay with him because she's in a relationship with unequal attraction, and he stays with her because she's willing to put up with him just being completely self-obsessed and talking about himself. So that's how a long-term relationship would look.